All right. Well, welcome to first ever WipeOS audio session. I'm excited about this opportunity. It's really nice to be able to get this information from our engineers. These guys work tirelessly for our organization, and we've really done a lot in the last 7 years to get our solution to where it's at. So with that said, I certainly appreciate Ben sitting here, but I will let him kind of introduce himself and share a little bit about, I guess, who you are and what you focus on with WipeOS.
Sure. So I'm Ben Hiltbrand. I'm a software engineer here at WipeOS, and I guess my main focus is on disks and erasure, focusing on that part of our software.
Awesome. And it's huge. And again, can't say it enough. We really appreciate all the contributions you've made in the years you've been working with us. So really today, again, is to take a look at some of the details of some of the things you have been working on. When it comes to data security, obviously WipeOS comes from the data destruction side of things. Wiping hard drives, certifying that that data is gone is the core of what we do. There are additional features and things that we provide our users, obviously, and we have good relationships with them to make sure they're getting the most from our solution. But the handiwork that you're doing really does help us with that ability to have certificates of destruction, make sure things are compliant, and the security is really there. With that said, there's been a lot of work you've done around Purge and the wiping method that is the NIST Purge. I'm careful about how I describe that because I know there are layers to what Purge is, so maybe that's kind of a good place to start. If you could kind of tell us a little bit from your experience and your expertise, what is the Purge wipe method in some sort of way that the rest of us could maybe understand without getting too technical, but how would you explain what Purge is?
Sure. So to start off with, Purge is a level of data destruction defined in the NIST standard, right? There's 3 levels: clear, purge, and destroy. Obviously, destroy is the highest level, clear is the lowest level. So a clear is basically just you overwrite the drive using read and write commands, and then you ensure that nothing can be read from the drive using those same commands, which suffices for most applications, but that doesn't overwrite any system sectors. So like reallocated sectors, on SSDs you can have more sectors for media wear out that will not get overwritten because we don't have direct access to the drive to overwrite those sectors. So what a purge is a firmware command. You send the drive and the drive will overwrite everything on the drive, including those system sectors, so there is no data left on there. Perfect. Yes, and that's what we want to see. Obviously, that is where our certificates of destruction give our users the peace of mind and provide proof that the drive has been wiped. I think the really exciting thing for me about Purge has been that drives that are newer and maybe larger capacities that may take longer to wipe can actually wipe much quicker with Purge, right? So that has been, from a user standpoint, and my communication with our users has definitely been a thing that's appreciated in the time and energy savings. We'll get into some more of that in a bit. I think earlier we were talking a little bit about, it started with the NVMEs and the solid state drives, but now we can support Purge on additional drive types. Can you talk about that a little bit? Sure, yeah. So we support Purge on all drive interface types, so SAS, SATA, NVMe, mechanical, and SSD. The Purge types differ based on which type of drive you're wiping, right? But the bare fact is the same. It's a Purge on any type.
Outstanding. Yeah, I've definitely had some lengthy conversations trying to explain what Purge is because it is different with different drives, right? And so it's not just a one-size-fits-all. It's a little different than what I think a lot of organizations are used to talking about wiping. But again, there's a lot of really great advantages to it. I think one thing to think about is kind of the comparison of the NIST Purge versus the NIST Clear. And I think there's still some confusion out there with that. So could you explain maybe a little bit of what those two are? Sure.
So like I said previously, a clear is you overwrite the drive using the drive's read and write commands, right? So typically for a NIST Clear on our system, we write all zeros across the entire drive. And that takes how long it takes to wipe the drive. Obviously bigger drives take longer than smaller drives, but you end up with a drive that's all zeroed. Now a purge, like I said, is a firmware command. And there's different types of purge. So like there's a cryptographic erase for drives that are self-encrypting. So that means the data on the drive is encrypted at rest. And when you try to read it, it uses an encryption key to decrypt it. So what a cryptographic erase does is just erase that key and generate a new one. So when you read the same data back, now it just looks like random garbage because the encryption key doesn't match. And a command like that is pretty much instantaneous. So it takes a few seconds, doesn't depend on the drive size at all. Then there's ones like a block erase for SSDs, which performs an erase, but it's not writing anything. And that it's quick, but it still takes a few minutes depending on the size of the drive, and it scales with the size of the drive. And then finally, there's stuff like an overwrite sanitize, which is essentially just like a clear, but the firmware is doing it itself, so it does overwrite all those sectors. But that's going to take about as long as a NIST clear anyway.
So you're able to navigate and utilize all those different methods depending on the drive and what's available. And when I say you, WipeOS is able to do that.
Yes, because the drive will report which types of purge commands it supports.
Aha, that's the magic.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Well, and I know when I talk to our users, obviously speed is always the main question, especially around erasure. And so one thing I continually sort of run into is this challenge of, we may have a policy about the wiping method we're using or that we've decided to kind of document in our organization, but we see that we could save a lot of time using a purge wipe method, for example. I think some of the challenge, again, for the users is understanding the differences from a certificate point of view, and that, if it's void of data and we've issued a certificate, there's no data. Doesn't matter if it was a purge or clear. But I think some groups still have a hard time making sure or feeling confident, in their documentation. And if it doesn't say NIST or even 3-pass, the good old legacy 3-pass wipe, that's still a requirement for some. They want to see that in their certificate. So I'm regularly encouraging users to use Purge, to talk to their, whether it's a auditor or a third-party group that's tracking some of their compliance stuff. It's a good thing to ask about and inquire about as far as if Purge meets their requirements, because it ought to. But from our perspective, the drive is void of data. We've given the certificate. It's good to go. One thing that I think is also interesting around Purge is how hardware and the hardware that's used to wipe the devices, being the servers and the chassis and different things, can basically affect the ability to use Purge, right? So I know from what I've learned from you guys, from our team, is that, as long as we have the correct backplane, cabling, sort of everything in place, where WipeOS is able to run the purge commands and do this magic. So when we're looking at, and when a user's thinking about the hardware they use, I know we've developed some packages and some different devices that work really well and have been configured that way. Are you still seeing or aware of users kind of using the wrong hardware or running into challenges because they're using maybe substandard hardware, or is there anything that you're seeing from our users in general that I guess would be opportunities for improvement on the hardware side?
I guess from my perspective, not really. I particularly with NVMe, just because the interface is so new, there's some quirks I would see with some hardware where it blocks some purge commands that it shouldn't be blocking just based on like the BIOS setup of a server. That's probably the main issue I see.
I didn't know that. That's actually very interesting. So a lot of times I think it's the easy button to have, a pre-configured machine that we say, here, go ahead, and everything's set and ready to go. But that's good to know that there may be some things with existing hardware that could make that work better. So do you think, well, from your perspective on the support side, it is obviously nice to have some uniform hardware out there in the wild, and you know what they're working with. So I think that's something we'll continue to work on and communicate with our users, but it's valuable that way. Moving on to kind of the next part of why Purge to me is really exciting and has a lot of value is the fact that it does save in energy, physically energy costs and energy usage, because if you're wiping a drive in less time, you've consumed less energy to do it. I know we did do some calculations where we were looking at, for example, a 1 terabyte drive was wiped in 45 seconds, and it was lightning fast because it had the purge capability there. versus that same drive wiping in 57 minutes, which was using a traditional NIST clear wipe and just a slower option. So with that, we calculated it out to be about 10,000 drives would equal $4,200 in energy savings per year, and that's just kind of going off of averages and things. So just sharing that, when you're working with Purge and kind of continuing to kind of support the devices that are supported this way, are there more opportunities for energy savings, or is it kind of one of those things, once Purge is available, it's done, it's good, or is it something that's always getting better and changing?
No, I would say once Purge is there, it's good. The one thing else I would mention is that Purge is particularly good for solid-state drives because the NAND flash cells in a solid-state drive only have a certain number of writes before they fail. So if all you're doing is overwriting the drive with a NIST clear, you're reducing the lifetime of the drive for essentially no gain just to erase it. But if you run a purge command, you're not actually overwriting anything, so you're saving the lifetime of those NAND flash cells. So you're extending the life of the drive by using Purge as well, rather than a NIST clear.
That is interesting. So there ought to be more information for resellers or anybody that's reselling the device to proudly say, hey, this was purged instead of a NIST wipe, meaning, and I guess, does that affect the health of the drive then? Is that something, if you compared the two, you would know after?
Well, you could see it like in the SMART for a number of sectors, read and written. They also report the SSD lifetime, so that would decrease. But it's just a general, you don't want to really waste the lifetime of a drive for essentially no gain, right?
Yeah, and a big part of why we do what we do and users use WipeOS is because they do want to resell the drives, they want to extend the life. So yeah, I feel like this is a great point to make, and certainly something we need to make sure users understand more, and the fact that it's not just that Purge is shown on your cert, it's that you've run a better wipe for the life of the drive and the value of the drive. That's awesome. Because yeah, I've definitely focused on a lot of just the conversation of their workflow and the downtime and things, but it's good to know that there's built-in actual value, not just the time savings, but the health of the drive and extending that life. So we definitely need to do more to talk about that and make that known. The other thing that's nice is that, the Purge method is compliant. It meets the sustainability standards for R2 and for all, I believe, NITAD and all the ones out there that say, hey, you need something compliant, something auditors can see. Purge follows those requirements. I think, I guess my question is, when it comes to some of the NIST standards, there is a NIST Purge standard, correct? Is that different than NIST Clear, or?
So the NIST standard is it's a general sanitization of media, right? And in there, it gives the 3 levels: clear, purge, and destroy. So it's like NIST 8088, I believe. It's the same standard as NIST Clear. It's just a different level in there for purge.
Perfect. That makes sense. So then it is still going back to it's reducing time, extending the life of the drive, and it's compliant. And I think what's great about that is, there's so many ESG initiatives out there where companies really do care about their environmental impact. So it's the bottom line of making things faster and saving costs, but to actually use less energy, less of environmental impact, it's great. I definitely would like to dig into that more and figure out some ways to sort of, get that data and really show what that impact is. So that may be another project to follow this one where we explore that more. But yeah, I think it always comes back to, again, our users really trying to combine that security side and the value there with really additionally the sustainability, but also their business best practices. And we kind of touch on all of those with just Purge. I mean, it's kind of wild to think that just being able to have a faster wiping method does all of these things for companies and for the world. I mean, we're saving the world with WipeOS, essentially, which is great. When it comes to sort of like the workflow conversation of Purge, I know, like we were talking about earlier, sometimes the hardware can be a little sensitive or particular. From your perspective, when it comes to sort of the workflow idea or best practices, is it safe to assume that companies should always try Purge first, or are there some things you would recommend as if somebody's trying to really understand when to use it or when not to?
My recommendation is if you only care about the wiping speed, like you don't need Purge for the extra security of the wipe, right? Then I would only purge SSDs, so NVMe or SATA SSDs, because that's where you'll get the fast purge. You can still purge most mechanical drives, but from what I've seen, most do not support fast purge methods, so it's not going to be any faster than a NIST clear.
See, that's news to me as well. I didn't realize there was faster and slower purge methods, which makes sense because it's the drives, right? It's the drives technology that will determine how fast that's running. So I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on that one, but fastest drive type to slowest drive type, do you know? Pop quiz.
I mean, it's hard to say because the fastest purge method is always going to be the cryptographic erase, but that does not depend. It only depends if the drive is self-encrypting or not, if it supports encryption, right? Which you could have encrypting and non-encrypting NVMEs, you can have encrypting and non-encrypting SAS and SATA SSDs, right? You can even have self-encrypting mechanical drives, in which case you will get a fast purge. But from what I've seen, that's pretty rare, which is why if you're going for speed, probably don't want to risk it, because you can't stop a purge in the middle, right? Once that command is started, it has to run to the end. Even if you unplug the drive and you plug it back in, it will probably just restart from the beginning if it does not damage the drive. So my recommendation for mechanical drives, probably stick for NIST clear, unless you happen to know for a fact that it supports a cryptographic erase. Otherwise, the other drive types should be the same. SSDs, if it's cryptographic erase, it'll be a few seconds. If it's a block erase, it'll be a few minutes at most, depending on the size of the drive.
Yeah, it does get somewhat complicated quickly when you look at a best practice sort of thing. And, I think that's maybe another interesting takeaway too, is to think about, if there's options and ways we can help our users identifying those drives. I know there's good communication a lot of times where they have their workflows and they identify certain drives go a certain direction or are handled a certain way. But I think that's another neat thing for us to maybe explore some more, is helping users to know, those options and being able to make it easy for them. No, that's great. I mean, this is the stuff that, again, I get into these conversations with our users, but I'm careful not to mislead them. And there's layers to this. It's not a very cut and dry. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, companies are moving quick and they need to have sort of set policies. And so they'll say, all right, we're going to purge or clear all of our drives. And then you run into those situations where it's like, well, those drives, you should have just ran the clear.
Yeah.
And it takes a little bit of management there. So that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation, honestly. And it'll be good to get some feedback from users or anybody interested in this subject, because it isn't, it's just not that simple. And there are best practices that can really make an impact for the company and for the environment and all of these things. So I think the key things to think about is, even just knowing more about this wipe method, companies being able to take advantage of it in a smart way. Again, it touches on their bottom line, it touches on their sustainability, and really just the overall operation, which is huge. I mean, it's a big value add that's kind of subtle and sort of quiet in these relationships that we have. So, I certainly thank you again for your help with all of this, your continued expertise on this, taking the time today to sit down and talk about this in our first ever discussion like this with WipeOS and myself. And I really think this will be a great way to sort of continue to share this valuable information with our users in a way that educates and makes it valuable for them. Anything else kind of before we go here around this topic of Purge and your experience with WipeOS? I mean, is this something that you see a lot of room to do more in? Is it kind of one of those things where we've really develop this solution and it covers the devices that we know of? I mean, obviously technology is going to change and come in, but is there more work that you have to do kind of on this?
I think right now it's pretty mature. There's always the possibility they add more purge methods and we have to add more support. But for right now, we support every purge method that exists. It's really just nailing down edge cases with certain hardware and certain setups, right? The only other thing I would mention about Purge that I've had questions come up is if you're complying with the R2v3 standard and doing a third-party verify for your media. So that specifies that you have to verify 5% of your sanitized media at some period, right, to ensure it's actually erased. So we can verify, like if you look at the WipeOS system, you can choose a purge with a verify, right? And we will verify however much of the media you choose there. But purge commands tend to leave the drive in an unknown state. So it could be random data, it could be random patterns that we don't know, in which case you probably won't be able to verify that because it's impossible to tell random data from encrypted data that's on the drive. So if you need to use a verify, you probably should not use purge because we can't verify that the drive will actually be in a verifiable state at the end. And that's come up a few times. So in those cases, you probably should just stick with a NIST clear because then you'll always be able to verify the drive after it's wiped.
Yep, and clear is just basically it's zeros.
Yes.
It's all, not basically, it is all zeros. So therefore, to verify it, you see that they're all zeros.
Yep.
Whereas with purge, it can be,
It could be random data, it could be any pattern, because it's completely firmware dependent. So however the drive manufacturer implemented the firmware. So cryptographic erasers, sometimes it's all random, sometimes you do get all zeros. Block erase, you tend to always get zeros, but there's nothing in the standard that says they have to do that, right? They could implement it however they want. The only one that's pretty much guaranteed to give zeros is overwrite, because you get to choose the pattern, but that's also the slowest purge method. So you're really not gaining anything by doing that versus a NIST clear.
Yeah, and I talked to our friends over at R2 that wrote the R2v3 guideline. I know there's some iterations coming on that may relate to this a little. I'm not quite sure, but I think it is still such a new thing in our side of the business or in the industry. It's really it's good to start really getting clear. That's probably the wrong word. Focused on what these wipe methods are and when it's appropriate. And again, if you're wiping drives or you intend to do a verification on, well, you should be aware that you should be wiping with the clear method for that intention. It's one of those things that kind of gets complicated because it is new and there's so many different scenarios in a concept that seems fairly simple. I think what happens from my experience is a lot of groups try to just have, we're just going to do purge forever and everything's going to be purge. And it's like, well, we do have the purge or clear method that does the clear if purge is not available, but that's a use case for that scenario. If the drive doesn't have it, it'll do clear. It's a different use case if they know they need to verify, probably shouldn't be running purge at all. Well, shouldn't be running purge at all. So it's one of those things, again, from both sides of this desk, from the engineer's perspective, it's definitely good for me to understand a little more. We don't have these conversations often enough, but a little more of what those details are so that when this comes up from the beginning, I can try and make sure we're educating and everybody's on the same page. But it is a hard thing and it changes over time. So again, I definitely appreciate your time, Ben. This is definitely a great conversation. I'm excited to do more things like this with you and the rest of the team. For anybody out there interested about or learning more about WipeOS, we have wipeos.com. You can always email us. You can email or call me directly, Josh at WipeOS, shameless plug. But yeah, we'd like to always set up demos and presentations. And if there are ever any technical questions or concerns, we have Ben here to jump on the call and join us if needed. But yeah, I definitely appreciate your time today. And I think this has been really, really great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely.